Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone.
Uh,
Usually when we talk about getting something done, right, like, I don't know, building a shelf or
hmm
balancing a budget, there is a manual.
Right, yeah, a clear set of steps.
Exactly. You follow the instructions, you get the result. It's predictable.
You execute the known variables and you arrive at the expected outcome.
But then you sit down at your desk
Mm.
and you're staring at a blank page or maybe a broken piece of code, and you need a completely new idea.
Yeah.
Suddenly that instruction manual is just gone.
Yeah, completely useless.
You're just waiting for a spark, right?
That's-
Hoping lightning strikes. And it feels completely out of your control. But what if I told you that waiting for lightning is, well, entirely the wrong approach? Today, we are exploring the actual mechanics of creativity, what it is, where it comes from, and how it literally rewires the inside of our brains.
It's the ultimate invisible force, honestly. I mean, for a long time, society has treated it like this mystical power reserved only for, eccentric painters and visionary poets.
Right. The chosen few.
Exactly. But when we strip away the romance and actually look at cognitive psychology and cutting-edge neuroscience, a very different, highly structured reality emerges.
And our mission for this deep dive is to prove to you, the listener, that creativity is a tangible, measurable biological process. We're pulling from a massive compilation of research, history, and psychology to show you that, more importantly, it's an engine you can actively tune and harness in your own daily life. So, okay, let's unpack this by actually going back in time.
Oh, we have to, because the way we think about creativity today is completely divorced from how our ancestors viewed it.
Oh, really?
Like, if you look at the etymology, the divide is incredibly telling. The English word creativity comes from the Latin root creare, which it translates to create or to make.
Making something.
Right. But if you examine Eastern and indigenous traditions, their foundational concepts lean much closer to the root creare.
Which means what exactly?
It means to let things grow.
Oh, wow. To let things grow. That is a massive difference in how we perceive our own role in the universe, isn't it?
It really is.
Because making something implies you are the architect. Like you are forcing a new concept into existence through sheer will. But letting it grow implies you're merely the gardener.
Yeah, you're just cultivating the right soil and environment for an idea that is already trying to bloom.
And for most of Western history, humans firmly believed they could not be the architect.
Not at all. Ancient cultures, including the Greeks, they didn't possess a concept for human creation in the way we understand it today. I mean, to philosophers like Plato, making art wasn't an act of creation. It was simply discovery or imitation.
Like tracing over a drawing that's already there.
Exactly. You were just copying the ideal forms that already existed out in the cosmos.
And then moving into the Judeo-Christian tradition. Generating something entirely unprecedented was viewed as the sole province of God.
Right. If a human composed a brilliant symphony or designed a breathtaking cathedral, it wasn't their personal genius. They were just a vessel, a temporary conduit for divine inspiration.
For a long time, humanity thought of creativity like catching a lightning bug in a jar. It was this external glowing thing you just had to blindly stumble upon and trap.
That is a perfect analogy.
But the narrative didn't truly fracture until the Renaissance, right? Fueled by humanism.
Yes, humanism changed everything. It placed this radical new value on the intellect and agency of the individual. So for the first time, society began to view creativity as an inherent human ability rather than a divine download.
The lightning bug wasn't external anymore. The Renaissance was the moment we finally looked down at our own hands and realized, wait, we are the ones generating the light.
Precisely. And this was the cultural petri dish that gave us the Renaissance man. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci, who proved that a single human mind could systematically generate profoundly novel, valuable ideas across, multiple completely unrelated disciplines.
But once we accepted that we were the ones generating that light, psychologists obviously wanted to categorize exactly what kind of light it was.
And how bright it could shine, yeah.
Which brings us to the modern 4C model of creativity. Because you don't have to be Da Vinci to be considered creative, right? Not every idea is painting the Mona Lisa.
Thank goodness no. There are measurable degrees to this. We can break it down into 4 distinct tiers.
Okay, walk us through them.
So the foundational level is mini-C. This is transformative learning. It's those personally meaningful internal aha moments you experience when you finally grasp a complex concept for the first time.
Like a kid figuring out addition.
Exactly. The next tier up is little c, which represents everyday problem solving. It's figuring out a more efficient way to organize your team's workflow or, substituting an ingredient on the fly while cooking dinner.
Which is the baseline innovation you, the listener, are probably doing constantly without even labeling it as creativity.
Oh, all the time. Then we escalate to Pro-C. This is professional-level creativity exhibited by people who are vocationally creative. Engineers, designers, working artists.
People getting paid to come up with ideas.
Right. They possess immense skill and produce highly original work, even if they aren't fundamentally altering the entire landscape of their industry.
Okay, and the final tier.
The final tier is Big C. With a capital C, this is domain-changing greatness, the Einstein, the Marie Curie level of monumental innovation that permanently alters human history.
Wow. Okay, so whether we are talking about little c workflow hacks or big C historical breakthroughs, we naturally want to look under the hood. We want to know the exact mechanics of how that idea factory in our brains operates.
And researchers have been mapping this out for a century. In 1926, a theorist named Graham Wallas presented one of the first structural models of the creative process. He charted it across 5 distinct biological and cognitive stages.
5 stages. Okay, what's stage 1?
The first stage is preparation. This is the heavy lifting. You focus intensely on a problem, gather raw data, and basically hit a wall of frustration.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it's exhausting. But then the second stage is incubation. And this is arguably the most misunderstood phase. It occurs when you completely step away from the problem, allowing it to sink into your unconscious mind.
I really want to pause on incubation because this is huge. When you, the listener, step away from a broken piece of code or a messy spreadsheet because you're frustrated and you go wash the dishes or take a shower, you probably feel a pang of guilt, like you're procrastinating.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone feels that guilt.
But you're actually shifting into a mandatory biological stage of problem solving. You stop actively thinking, but your brain is still aggressively chewing on the data in the background.
Which seamlessly transitions into Wallace's third stage, intimation.
Intimation, what is that?
That is the elusive, nagging feeling that a solution is hovering just out of reach. Like it's right around the corner.
Yeah, tip of the tongue feeling.
Exactly. Then the fourth stage is illumination. The sudden insight, the explosive aha moment bursting into conscious awareness.
Light bulb.
The light bulb. And the final stage is verification, where you take that raw, sudden insight and consciously test it against reality to see if it actually works.
Because sometimes the light bulb is a terrible idea.
Yes, often it is. Now, to actually reach that illumination stage, our brains have to constantly toggle between 2 very different cognitive gears, convergent and divergent thinking.
Okay, what is the difference between those 2 gears?
Understanding the friction between them is essential. Convergent thinking is the process of aiming for a single, correct, or highly optimized solution to a rigidly defined problem.
Like a math test.
Right. Or asking, how do we reduce this quarter's overhead by 15%? There are objectively right and wrong paths. You need the single best answer.
It's a funnel. You're taking a massive amount of variables and narrowing them down to one sharp point.
Divergent thinking flips the funnel upside down.
Like
It's the ability to generate multiple, completely novel answers to an open-ended prompt.
Okay, give me an example.
If I hand you a wooden chair and ask, what can this be used for? Convergent thinking says to sit on. Divergent thinking says a stepladder, firewood, a lion tamer's shield, a modern art sculpture.
A lion tamer's shield, I love that. And the neuroscience behind how our brains manage that divergent explosion is incredible. When neuroscientists map this process, the frontal lobe obviously lights up as the command center. But the most mind-blowing mechanism happens when we are completely unconscious. Specifically during rapid eye movement or REM sleep.
Yes, REM sleep serves as a highly specialized biological incubator. When you enter REM sleep, the chemical composition of your brain radically alters.
How so?
Well, first, a region called the hippocampus gets flooded with high levels of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine.
Okay, I know the hippocampus deals heavily with memory and spatial navigation. What is that chemical flood actually doing to our memories while we sleep?
Think of your hippocampus as the brain's strict filing clerk. During the day, it keeps your memories organized, logical, and separated into neat chronological categories.
Right, making sense of the world.
But the high acetylcholine during REM sleep essentially suppresses feedback from that strict filing clerk. It literally locks the clerk out of the office.
Wow.
Concurrently, in the neocortex, that's the deeply folded outer layer of the brain where complex higher-level thought occurs, levels of a chemical called norepinephrine drop significantly.
Norepinephrine is what keeps our thoughts rigid and controlled when we are awake, Right.
Yes, exactly. So imagine the state of your brain during REM. The strict filing clerk is locked out, and the rigid control chemicals in the neocortex are totally depleted.
So it's the Wild West in there.
Pretty much. Without those constraints forcing your thoughts to stay in logical lanes, your neocortex acts like a manic switchboard operator. It starts randomly plugging completely unrelated concepts into each other.
Connecting the memory of a chair to the concept of fire to the emotional resonance of modern art.
Exactly. It's why our dreams are wonderfully bizarre, but it's also the exact mechanism that allows you to wake up with a brilliant, divergent solution you would never have authorized while fully conscious.
I love that switchboard explanation because it makes the chaos feel purposeful. But I have to admit, I struggled with another psychological framework we uncovered in the sources, B.F. Skinner's behaviorism theory.
Ah, yes. Skinner.
He essentially argued that creativity isn't an internal spark at all. It's just accidental, random behaviors that happen to get reinforced by the environment. You do something weird, you get a reward, so you do it again. Doesn't that cold, mechanical view completely strip away the magic of the whole process?
What's fascinating here is that while Skinner's original premise sounds coldly mechanical, modern neuroeconomic frameworks reveal it to be an incredibly elegant system of biological optimization.
Optimization how?
It's not just blind, random bumping in the dark. The brain calculates utility. It constantly decides whether to exploit a known, safe idea or burn the extra glucose required to explore an unknown, risky idea.
So how does the brain calculate if a creative risk is actually worth taking?
Through a network called the locus coeruleus system. This acts as the brain's risk-reward thermostat. When you try something completely unconventional, say, combining two distinct coding languages to solve a bug and it actually works, this system triggers a massive release of noradrenaline.
And what does that do?
That chemical rush literally rewires your neural pathways in real time. It signals to the brain, hey, that divergent risk was highly profitable. Feel safe taking a similar cognitive risk next time.
So we shape by reinforcement, but the mechanism doing the shaping is a highly sophisticated neural network, actively seeking to maximize the value of your thoughts.
Exactly.
But if creativity is this deeply tied to biology, brain chemistry, and neural optimization, it raises a huge question about baseline capacity. Is creativity just a byproduct of raw computing power? Like, do you have to be a certified genius to be highly creative?
That's a huge debate. The relationship between intelligence and creativity has been intensely scrutinized, but the consensus points to the threshold theory.
The threshold theory, meaning intelligence is a necessary foundation, but only up to a very specific point.
Right. The data indicates that IQ and creativity correlate positively, but only up to an IQ threshold of about 120.
Okay, so 120 is solidly above average intelligence, but it is not off the charts once-in-a-generation genius.
Not at all. Up to 120, a higher IQ generally translates to higher creative output. But once you cross that threshold, the correlation completely dissolves.
Wait, really?
Yeah. A person with an IQ of a 150 is not statistically any more creative than someone with an IQ of a 120.
Raw processing power just isn't enough. Which brings us to the psychological state. We've all been exposed to the tortured artist trope, right? The mad genius.
Right.
Is there actual empirical science backing up the link between the creative spark and mental illness?
There is a profoundly strong, heavily documented connection, actually. Researcher Nancy Andreessen conducted a landmark long-term study analyzing highly creative authors.
And what did she find?
She initially hypothesized a link to schizophrenia, but what the data actually revealed was that a staggering 80% of the creative group had experienced a major episode of mental illness in their lifetime, specifically mood disorders like bipolar disorder.
80%. I mean, when you compare that to the general public, it's a massive overrepresentation.
Follow-up studies tracking individuals over 15 years showed that 43% of these authors had bipolar disorder, compared to roughly 1% of the general population.
That is wild. But why? What is chemically or psychologically happening during a bipolar episode that triggers innovation?
It's critical to note that the dark, depressive swings are not what generate the brilliant creative spurts. The catalyst is the manic or hypomanic upswing, that neurological process of climbing out of the depression.
What happens during the upswing?
During hypermania, an individual experiences a massively bolstered sense of self-confidence, heightened perception, and a fearless, almost reckless sense of individualism.
So they just don't care what people think.
Right. This state temporarily, completely overrides the self-doubt and social inhibition that usually throttle divergent thinking.
There's also a fascinating biological difference in individuals with schizotypal personality traits,
Yeah.
right? These are people who might be highly eccentric or hold unconventional beliefs, but don't suffer from full schizophrenia. Their brains physically route information
Could
differently.
do. In a typical brain engaging in divergent thinking, you see activation spread across both sides of the prefrontal cortex as it tries to manage the task.
Okay.
But individuals with schizotypal traits show heavily skewed, intense activation in the right prefrontal cortex specifically.
And how does that right side activation change their thought process?
That concentrated right side activity essentially acts as a hyper-efficient bridge to the brain's semantic networks. It allows them to access both hemispheres much more fluidly,
Meaning what, in practical terms?
meaning a rigid, logical concept housed in the left hemisphere can instantly collide with an abstract, emotional concept in the right hemisphere. They make novel, sometimes bizarre associations at a speed most people simply cannot match.
It's incredible how a slight shift in brain lateralization drastically alters how a person perceives reality. But, that lack of inhibition, that total willingness to deviate from the norm, it doesn't always result in a beautiful poem or a life-saving technology.
No, it definitely doesn't. Researchers classify the destructive application of these traits as malevolent creativity.
Malevolent creativity?
Yeah, this is original thinking driven by the explicit intention to cause harm, deceive, or exploit.
Wow.
It is the divergent thinking utilized in complex financial frauds, premeditated crimes, or sophisticated cyber attacks.
It is the literal psychological definition of an evil genius.
Pretty much. Creativity inherently requires breaking rules and ignoring conventions, right? When you combine that capability with high levels of implicit aggression and low levels of premeditation, meaning the individual is impulsive and prone to anger, you get malevolent creativity.
Yikes.
Interestingly, though, when highly aggressive people are forced by their environment to stop and systematically premeditate their actions, their expression of malevolent creativity drops significantly.
So if unchecked creativity can become malevolent, how do healthy innovators keep their wild ideas productive? How do you avoid going off the deep end while still taking those necessary risks?
Right. How do you channel it?
Exactly. And there is a brilliant framework for this in the sources called Sternberg's investment theory of creativity. It suggests that highly creative people operate exactly like ruthless, successful stock market investors.
Yes. They look at the landscape of ideas and they essentially buy low and sell high.
They buy low on the weird, undervalued, or widely mocked ideas. They absorb the initial risk. They persevere, develop the concept, and endure the rejection until society finally catches up and sees the value.
And then what?
Then, once the idea is mainstream and highly valued, they sell high, meaning they hand it off to managers or operators and move on to find the next undervalued, weird idea.
It requires a massive amount of psychological capital to endure that prolonged period when everyone in your industry thinks your investment is foolish.
It really does. So assuming you, listening right now, want to make good, healthy investments with your ideas, how do you purposefully cultivate this kind of cognitive environment in your actual life? Let's talk about constraints. Because normally, if I am short on time or budget, I feel like my creativity is being suffocated.
The debate over material constraints is foundational in psychology. Do a lack of money, materials, or equipment starve creativity, or do they force it?
And what's the verdict?
The research leans heavily toward the reality that humans are cognitively lazy.
Hey, speak for yourself.
Well, biologically speaking, we will rely on established routines and safe, converging solutions for as long as possible. We only truly innovate when severe constraints completely block our normal pathways.
A perfect historical example of this is the rapid development of the jet engine during World War II. The material shortages and absolute desperation of the conflict essentially forced aerospace engineers to abandon traditional propeller mechanics entirely.
Exactly. When you can no longer rely on your standard resources, your brain is forced to engage the locus coeruleus system and authorize high-risk divergent thinking.
However, there is one specific type of constraint that acts as an absolute creativity killer, right? The cognitive need for closure.
Oh, this is a devastating pitfall in modern corporate environments. The need for closure is that urgent, burning desire to just get a task done, to find a firm answer and cross it off your to-do list.
We all know that feeling, the Friday afternoon panic.
Right. When you are under intense time pressure, your brain demands closure. It shuts down the chaotic, divergent exploration phase prematurely and forces convergent thinking. You grab the very first available mediocre solution just to relieve the anxiety of the unfinished task.
So rushing literally forces your mind to close. But there is a surprisingly practical, actionable tip for combating this.
Yeah.
Reading fiction.
Yes.
How does reading a novel actually change how I process a budget deficit at work? I mean, that sounds disconnected.
It sounds like a stretch, but reading fiction fundamentally forces your brain to sit in a state of prolonged ambiguity. You are introduced to a mystery or a conflict, you don't know how the story resolves, and you are forced to tolerate that lack of closure for hundreds of pages.
Oh, I see.
Research demonstrates that people who regularly engage with fiction undergo a cognitive shift. They develop a much lower psychological need for immediate closure. When they encounter a messy, unresolved problem at work, they don't panic. They are far more comfortable sitting in that chaotic incubation stage, allowing better ideas to surface. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely redefines how we should structure organizational creativity. Whether you're running a tech startup or a classroom, the environment dictates the cognitive output.
How so?
Leadership styles that enforce strict hierarchies and harshly punish mistakes artificially trigger that need for closure and fear of risk. But environments that actively downplay hierarchy and create genuine psychological safety allow the diversity of a team to shine.
Because everyone feels safe throwing out weird ideas.
Right. Without psychological safety, diverse viewpoints just cause interpersonal conflict. With it, they create a collective, massive pool of novel associations.
So what does this all mean? For you, the listener, heading into your next big project or sitting down at your drafting table, it means that the frustratingly tight budget you've been handed isn't necessarily a roadblock. Based on the neurobiology, it might be the exact constraint you need to force your brain off its routine path.
Absolutely.
It means that stepping away to take a walk or prioritizing a full night of REM sleep so your neocortex can play isn't procrastinating. It is a mandatory biological stage of the work.
It means recognizing that the creative spark isn't an external muse. It is internal chemistry, optimized through your physical environment, your psychological safety, and your learned willingness to tolerate ambiguity.
We've covered massive ground today, from the ancient Greeks believing art was just cosmic imitation, to the Renaissance putting the power of the architect in human hands. We've explored how your locus coeruleus rewards cognitive risk, how your hippocampus goes to sleep so your neocortex can act like a manic switchboard operator, and how you don't need a genius-level IQ to change the world.
Just an IQ around 120 and the courage to buy low on weird ideas.
Exactly. Whether you are engaging in little c daily problem solving or striving for big C domain shifting work, you are participating in a measurable process that you can actively nurture.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, slightly unsettling concept from the research to mull over. Something that challenges everything we just established about human exceptionalism.
Oh boy, lay it on us.
It's a rapidly expanding field called computational creativity.
The intersection of AI and the aha moment.
Specifically, the formal theory proposed by a researcher named Jürgen Schmidhuber. He suggests that creativity, curiosity, and that sudden burst of illumination aren't uniquely human traits at all.
What are they then?
They are simply the byproducts of a very basic computational principle, measuring and optimizing learning progress.
But how can a computer made of silicon and code actually feel an aha moment?
Schmidhuber programmed artificial intelligence to chase what he calls wow effects. He gives the AI an intrinsic reward, essentially a shot of digital dopamine, not for solving a specific pre-programmed problem, but whenever it successfully finds a new, unexpected pattern that allows it to compress data more efficiently.
So if the data it's analyzing is totally random, it's boring to the AI.
Right.
And if the data is totally predictable, it's also boring.
Exactly. The AI only gets its reward for finding newly discoverable hidden regularities, and Schmidhuber argues this is exactly what the human brain is doing.
So we are just compressing data.
According to him, yes. When a physicist discovers a new mathematical law that simplifies the universe, that's just elegant data compression. When a comedian invents a joke with an unexpected punchline that suddenly connects two completely unrelated concepts, that's a computational wow effect.
Oh, wow.
If a machine can be mathematically programmed to seek out and experience its own aha moments through intrinsic rewards, it raises a profound question about our future.
At the beginning of this deep dive, we talked about how humanity used to view creativity as catching a lightning bug in a jar. Something divine, external, and entirely out of our control. Then during the Renaissance, we realized we were the ones generating the light. But if Schmidhuber is right and creativity is just a universal algorithm of data compression and wow effects, we have to ask ourselves, is human creativity truly unique anymore? Or will the next great Renaissance man be an algorithm? Something to think about the next time you're staring at a blank page. Thanks for diving deep with us.